Even when I moved to the US 15 or so years ago, I mean, America was not known for being the thinnest country in the world, but something really strange has happened over the last 10 years. And it's all accelerated since 2020. All you have to do is go to a Walmart or Target or a shopping mall. I mean, I find it depressing. We have a population that is addicted to ultra processed foods. They are consuming ridiculous amounts of calories, of carbs, of sugars, of inflammatory ingredients every single day. And rather than have a massive public health campaign, 100 times the order of magnitude of what we had against big tobacco, the solutions now put forward by the medical establishment, oh, let's just inject people.
Dr. Suneel Dhand, what's wrong with doctors?
Oh, what a question to start there, Dave. I like the question right off the bat. Well, what's wrong with doctors? I think a better question would be what's wrong with the entire medical profession? There is a trend, sadly, across the Western world. Doctors like myself, who aren't super old, we're kind of mid-career, have seen something change. We felt it over the last 10, 20 years. And millions of people up and down, we'll talk about the United States, feel it too. The situation with the pandemic exacerbated this perception that all is not quite right. Doctors historically have been members of a profession that has earned a lot of respect, and quite rightly so. Doctors do a very important job. But somewhere, I would say over the last 20 to 30 years, doctors have lost complete control of the profession. Most of us go into medicine with very good intentions. And unfortunately, this issue of how any practicing doctor goes into an environment after they graduate, their years of training, they're in so much debt. And many doctors now themselves are stuck. And I don't want to blame doctors too much. I think to a degree, doctors need to accept some degree of collective responsibility because the profession has entirely sold out to big business interests, entirely sold out to the pharmaceutical industry, to the detriment of the health and well-being of millions of patients. And now, frontline medicine, to a large extent, has sadly become protocol following. Critical thinking skills have gone a long time ago. Patients are treated like they're on an assembly conveyor belt, churned in and out of clinics. There's no personalization. What happened to those days of old? You probably remember those days, Dave, where a doctor would come to your house. They would know your whole family. They scribbled on a piece of paper. There was minimal bureaucracy. It used to be 25 minutes with your patient, face to face, looking them in the eye, and then 5 minutes scribbling a note. Now it's the other way around. 5 minutes with the patient, 25 minutes with the computers and clicking all the boxes. That would be a good place to start as to what's wrong with doctors. What happened to that good old-fashioned doctor who would come to your house with a bag, would treat you and your family like a human being? It's gone, sadly. And I'm one of a few doctors who wants to try to bring it back in any way we can, because our profession needs it. We need to stay true to the principles of Hippocrates.
Why is there such a lack of critical thinking?
This is a fantastic question. I think there are a few reasons why this happens. I can think of three. One is you go into medical school, doctors might be book smart, but rarely are they taught the ability to critically think. We know what's happening now in universities across the country. There's a broader discussion about lack of debate and wanting to clamp down on freedom of opinion. But nowhere more do you need this in medicine, because historically, all of the great discoveries have come from those doctors who step back and say, "All my colleagues are doing everything wrong here. This makes no sense whatsoever." And doctors instead, medical students, are taught to simply memorize facts. So that's the first problem. At no stage during medical education are doctors encouraged to become critical thinkers and really ask questions. The second is the whole culture of medicine, which is to follow orders. And this starts very early on. And even when you graduate, when you become an intern and a resident, you follow the orders of your attending. And then the attending follows whatever the physician society tells them to do. Oh, prescribe this medicine, prescribe that, do this investigation. It's all in a protocol. And this comes on nicely to my third main issue here, is the complete capture of medicine by other interests and other agendas. And again, it's bad to be too critical of the frontline doctor who might be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and wants to put their head down and do a job. But that doctor is following orders from physician societies who are captured. And at every level of healthcare, now we sadly have this capture, big business interests, pharmaceutical companies coming in, and they are dictating how medicine is practiced. So what room is there for critical thinking when you have strings being pulled and doctors effectively being puppets on a string?
The other issue that stems from that last point you made is, why would anyone want to critically think when, if they do, they are treated like a pariah, right? Like
Exactly.
everyone comes down on them. They're like, you're not in the mainstream thinking anymore. You're crazy, right?
Boy, exactly. And wasn't this a wake-up call for me as well? I almost had to leave my profession, leave the country, leave the USA during the pandemic because I asked questions and I was proved to be right, actually, in the end, in many things I was saying. But unfortunately, we have this culture in medicine. It probably is in lots of professions. To be fair, human beings are human beings. We exhibit chimpanzee behavior. We are group animals, and groupthink is an intrinsic part of being a human. But unfortunately, the last place you want groupthink is in the field of medicine and science. And yes, if a doctor stands away from the group, says something that the group doesn't like, or disobeys with the authorities, they're putting a lot on the line, especially when you are heavily in debt and you've worked for years and years to be in your current career and you want to climb the ladder. It's a risky thing to do.
You're being very outspoken about this kind of thing. So just to use an analogy to ask this question, right? So I'm a computer programmer. So if for example, I was regularly kind of talking about how I think programmers are all useless and that kind of thing, like
Yeah.
I'm talking in terms of titles of your videos, I would end up being, kind of sent to Coventry to kind of,
Yeah.
like how do your peers react to your opinions on things?
Oh, well, I mean, I've taken a lot of heat. I put it into two categories. The ones that I work with on an everyday basis when I work clinically have known me for many years, know me on a personal level. So I'd say I face less heat from them. Some might disagree, but we have collegial relationships. But where I've taken the most heat is online. The amount of threats I've got, the amount of abuse that I've got for what I say, that's part and parcel of standing tall. But I enjoy reading history. I am very confident when I put forward a view, I'm doing so reasonably and scientifically. And I know that frequently the mob ends up being proved wrong in the end. So this is a character trait which I think everybody who feels strongly and passionately about issues should develop, that you will take heat if you stand strong and tall. But that's something that has to be done if you truly believe in what you're saying and want to make a difference, because right now we have an absolute catastrophe, not just with the healthcare system, but also, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, the metabolic health disaster that has befallen upon our population.
On that, it's just getting out of control. In the culture, you can't say that someone is fat or obese anymore. That's fat shaming, and this kind of plays into the hands of the people that want to sell you drugs and stuff to manage obesity, rather than actually take action yourself to do something about it.
Of course, yeah, it's a very sinister thing that's going on. I'm sure a lot of your viewers are passionate about this issue and can see what's happening, because at the end of the day, I consider people like ourselves who really care, that don't want our neighbors to be sick, don't want kids especially to be sick, have a duty, a moral obligation to speak out. But we come up against huge force of the establishment. And what disappoints me the most is that a large part of this is the medical establishment that has created a whole industry out of obesity, type 2 diabetes, inflammation, even cancer. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to be very blunt here, as you know I am in my posts and videos. These people truly have blood on their hands. They are a death cult. And if we fail to speak up and say, no, it's not okay to be obese, I'm not shaming you, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but it is in your best interest. If you don't want to get a disease, if you don't want to be sick, if you don't want to die early, if you want to watch your children grow up and graduate, this is a problem you need to fix. I mean, this works me up so much, so my voice may become louder as I'm speaking, but what could be more disempowering than taking the one thing which is truly in people's control, which is their everyday habits, their eating behaviors, their lifestyle? That's the only thing that they really control, and disempowering people. And there's a huge movement in the medical community that says, oh, this is genetic. You can't do anything about it, but take our injection, help us make money. Meanwhile, the population just gets sicker. I mean, goodness me, this was a problem even when I moved to the US 15 or so years ago. I mean, America was not known for being the thinnest country in the world, but something really strange has happened over the last 10 years. And it's all accelerated since 2020. All you have to do is go to a Walmart or Target or a shopping mall. I mean, I find it depressing. We have a population that is addicted to ultra processed foods. They are consuming ridiculous amounts of calories, of carbs, of sugars, of inflammatory ingredients every single day. And rather than have a massive public health campaign, 100 times the order of magnitude of what we had against big tobacco, the solutions now put forward by the medical establishment, oh, let's just inject people every single week for the rest of their lives and continue to poison them with food. I mean, it's ludicrous. Imagine doing that, Dave, for smoking. Imagine if 30 years ago, the whole mantra, which probably would have been the case because the world has lost its mind, they would have said, oh, no, let people smoke. We'll just give them an injection or we'll put an implant in their lung. Thank goodness the world wasn't as crazy in the 1970s as it is now.
I think this problem is everyone, like you say, does feel like they've got no power. They've really managed to sell. I mean, I'm not sure they is necessarily the pharmaceutical companies in this context, but like over time, we've just been sold this idea that if we're overweight, we've just been unlucky in the genetic lottery.
Yeah, but this has all happened, hasn't it, in the last 10, 15 years? It didn't used to be like that. I mean, you can watch old shows from only 15 or so years ago where they would blatantly say, oh, you need to stop eating. Is it a good idea that you eat that cake? People were honest then because everybody knew that you'll become sick if you do those things. I don't know what's happened, but I can't speak for the societal issues, whether social media has done this or what the issue is. But I will say that the medical establishment has to shoulder a lot of this blame because we sadly in medicine have become infested, and I'm going to use that term. Don't use it lightly, but every single level, whether we're talking about physician societies, licensing authorities, the three-letter agencies in the US, which are a disaster, have been infested with people who have completely the wrong attitude towards health and well-being. We cannot get healthy as a country with these people in charge. It's simply impossible. As far as I'm concerned, all the three-letter agencies must be immediately defunded, disbanded, and started again. Because I can't claim to know all the solutions. I don't claim to be a guru, but I do know who you don't want in the room if you're trying to solve the problem. And it would be anybody who's there. It's like, I heard it put very well the other day. It would be like back in the 1770s when the colonies were trying to become free and the Brits were saying, oh, Sam Adams, Jefferson, why don't you come join our committees and let's work on this? No, you are the problem. We're not going to fix anything until you are out of the picture. That's what I truly believe.
Yeah, you gotta get the bureaucrats out of the way and get the people at the coalface working on the problem rather than edicts from above.
Exactly. Only a
Yeah.
complete revolution will work in healthcare at every level. And
Mm.
starting, I think I'm very hopeful that this is going to start from the bottom up, and people are getting more educated now. I'm very happy with what's happened with RFK over the last few weeks. You can see more newspaper articles talking about ultra processed foods and sugars and what they're doing to us. And it's interesting because I always like to say history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme, because exactly the same thing happened with the cigarette industry. Up until the early 70s, patients were given cigarettes in the hospital. Doctors would go on ward rounds and smoke. They'd be smoking in clinics. They'd give their patients a cigarette. And it took so long. People started talking more and saying, hold on, my loved ones are all getting cancer. This is awful. And it took years for the medical establishment to finally jump on board because of corruption, high level corruption. They were being paid off by the tobacco industry. The same thing is happening now. And I actually really believe that ultra processed foods and sugars are 10 times worse, probably more than that, than smoking. Because when did you ever hear about a 20-year-old getting lung cancer from smoking? It took years for that to happen. Plus, smokers were thin. But ultra processed foods are giving teenagers, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease. A pediatrician would go their whole career and never see this condition. And now the two exploding conditions in adolescence are type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease. Whole clinics are devoted to this. And how on earth every doctor out there is not waking up in a cold sweat every night at the damage that these foods are doing, I do not know. This is where I call for a great awakening. If any doctor out there went into the profession because they care, now is the time, because eventually the dam is going to break, and I'm sure this is all going to be realized. You should be early here, speaking up.
Yeah, when I go back to think about my high school, my elementary school, there was one fat kid in every grade level or
You
something,
remember who
and
he was?
now,
I remember who ours was. It was one in the whole class. That's
yeah, and now it's the complete, like it's 180 degrees.
it's devastating, and we are living in historic times. I want to impart this on our listeners here as well. Nothing like this has ever happened before. This is truly unprecedented.
Coming back to the doctor side of things, I think one of the real issues here is, like, you go to the doctor, and let's say it's the first time you visited the clinic. You're filling out the little, application form in the surgery, and it says, "How many drinks do you have per week?
Yep.
Do you smoke?" All these kind of questions. There's no question about, did you eat Cocoa Pops for breakfast this
Yeah,
morning? There's
it's
nothing
not.
like that.
Oh, and it gets even worse than that. I can tell you, working at the front lines, the amount of patients I see in the hospital, have seen for many years. They're sick, inflamed, they're obese. They'll be fed sugary cereal and soda first thing in the morning. They'll be fed muffins. My goodness, it makes you want to tear your hair out. I mean, how can there be such complete ignorance from the medical profession on this, that you would take somebody who has this problem and you'd shove this food in their face while trying to treat them at the same time? It's unbelievable. And that is why we have the problem we have now. If doctors are not aware of this, I mean, to be fair, go to any physician conference. Many doctors are setting a terrible example themselves. They have no idea what to eat. They're obese. What hope is there if doctors don't even know this stuff?
Yeah, it's always funny when you've got an obese doctor sitting in front of you lecturing you about, you need to eat more vegetables or something like that. And it's
Exactly.
like,
Or you have to take a pill or injection to be healthy. Meanwhile, they
yeah.
are the as far away from a good role model of health as you can imagine.
How does this play out? Are things just going to get worse, do you think?
I
Or
think
is
things
there?
are going to get worse because there's a deliberate silence from authorities. It's very, very sad. Um, give it 10 years, all these kids now that are so sick are going to not only be sicker themselves, which is a tragedy for them, but they're also going to result in exponentially increasing healthcare costs. I mean, to have people in their late 20s and 30s be so sick. I mean, we're talking about 50% of adolescents now are overweight or obese. The dam will break at some point. but I fear it will be too late. And I can assure you, I don't know if you travel overseas much, but Europe might be catching up slowly. But you go to other countries, go to Russia, go to the Far East, it's nothing like this. And those countries will eventually take over if they've got healthy populations. I mean, this is a law of nature. If you have a huge percentage, over 50% of your country, which is physically unwell, you can't possibly be successful.
Yeah, because it affects every area, whether that is defense, whether that's technology, whatever it is,
Yeah,
right?
work,
It just fall further and
productivity,
further
everything.
behind.
Yeah, of course, of course. And as I said earlier, this is unprecedented, and nothing like this has ever happened before. Throughout history, traditionally, the goal of any leadership or government was to produce a strong population. Okay, for most of history, they did this for bad reasons because they wanted to get strong people to go and fight in armies, but at least they were trying to make them healthy. They didn't want weaklings to go to the front lines and fight. But this is truly something extraordinary that's going on here.
So, for you personally, what was the moment that you kind of said, there's something wrong here? You know, whether it's in the medical profession or any other profession, you know, there are people that get to a point where they think, you know what, the way this business is operating, there's a big problem with this. And you it's just that one thread that you pull and then suddenly, you know, everything falls on top of you, you know. What was the moment for you?
So I'd suspected that something was wrong for a long time. After I graduated as an attending, I very quickly shifted my focus to health and well-being. Things were okay then compared to how they are now. And I realized that medicine was dominated by big business interests. But I would say my rude awakening was during the pandemic, as for lots of people, because I realized then that our authorities have absolutely zero interest in the health and well-being of the population. They do the opposite of what should be done. They encourage people to consume ultra processed foods, stay indoors during a pandemic so that their risk factors go through the roof. There wasn't even one word, even though we knew very early on that obesity was the biggest risk factor, probably bigger than age, for being hospitalized. I would say I worked at maybe 8 hospitals during the pandemic. I was volunteering to work at different hospitals that needed help. And I didn't see a single person under the age of 60 admitted who was not obese. So how on earth you wouldn't shout this message out from the rooftops and say, hey, there's a modifiable risk factor that can be altered here. Go ahead, put some effort in, do it in a nice way. They had zero interest in that. But what did they have interest in? Injecting as many people as possible so that their big pharma buddies make as much money. Ludicrous situation. I use the term clown world a lot in my videos, but that's what I saw. And I realized that our authorities are not only not interested in health and well-being, but I consider them to be dangerous. We have to have a complete revolution in healthcare. Anyone who really cares for this should be shouting this out from the rooftops. And I'll take another point here, because a lot of people say, oh, doctors can't change people's behavior. What absolute nonsense. That's a cop out. Doctors put out the message on smoking and smoking rates went drastically down. And are you seriously telling me that doctors could shut the whole world down over a virus like we had, which statistically was actually a cold in most people, even from the beginning? Okay, some people got very sick, but statistically speaking, most people did not. They shut the whole world down over that. They put people in their houses fearful. I simply do not believe that if doctors spoke with a unifying message, that they couldn't really alter the needle here in a very, very big way on how people go about consuming food in the United States.
That particular topic such a is such a big thing. They did so much damage
Yes.
to the world. I mean, I live in Japan and I live next to a river, and the amount of people that self-deleted or tried to self-delete, I'm using my YouTube language now, tried to do that after that pandemic started and people were losing their jobs
Yeah,
and like there was so
awful.
much uncertainty. It's just so awful.
It's terrible. And Japan doesn't have a lot of the problems that we have in the US. When were you last in the US?
97.
Oh, wow. So you haven't been here for a few years then. Okay. Well, you would have to see it to believe it. If you came to the US now and saw the state of, I mean, it is unbelievable. When you go out and you look at the state of adults and kids, at catastrophe. I mean, any Japanese person, I'm sure, would not believe what they're seeing.
Yeah. I think Japan is doing a lot better health wise than many Western countries, but the problems of the Western countries are slowly creeping into Japan, and you can see it in the younger people. Like they're starting to get more into the fast food. They're starting to get
Mm.
more into
It's a curse.
just yeah, all the lifestyle factors. The problems are there. It's just going to be delayed here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and hopefully there are elements of Japanese culture as well that are very unique that will save them from becoming as bad as the US or reversing course very quickly. But yeah, the US and UK, sadly, I mean, I go back to the UK every few months where I grew up. My family is there. And the UK is fast catching up with the USA as well.
If you had the power to change things, if you were in a position where you're in one of these three-letter agencies or you're at the head of the government, like how would you go about at least getting things moving in the right direction?
Yeah, you mentioned the three-letter agencies. I was serious when I said they have to be defunded and disbanded. I'm not saying you have nothing there. You need some sort of health authority, but you firstly get rid of the people that are there. They're not going to be part of the solution. You need to have doctors with my kind of philosophy there. And there are more than you might think who are truly focused on health and well-being, who have no conflicts of interest. You must completely ban any health authority leader from having any affiliation with big business. I'd say do it for at least 10 years after they leave the position. Then I would ban pharmaceutical advertising in the US. That is completely out of control. When I have the misfortune sometimes of watching cable TV, I don't have it myself, but I'll go to a hotel or a friend's house. It's often now every single ad that is a pharmaceutical ad. I don't know how more people don't question that. Ban that. That could actually be done high level with an executive order right away. To do that, though, with the level of conflicts that we have in the US is very tough because Big Pharma basically owns the US government. This is both political parties. Two-thirds of all congressmen and senators have taken money from Big Pharma. It's the biggest lobbying organization in Washington, D.C. So you can imagine the pushback that you would get. And again, coming back to a history rhyming but not repeating itself. So there's always been a dominant industry. For most of history, it's been the war industry that has just completely banked from every nation going to war every 10 years. Then for a little bit, it became big oil in the latter part of the last century, and now it's big pharma. So they won't give up their power early, but personally, I would ban big pharma advertising. Then I would ban, this is the third thing I would do, any physician society in the United States, whether it's the American Medical Association, the College of Physicians, pediatrics, you cannot take more than $50 a year, yeah, $50 a year from any pharmaceutical company. Do that and you will see things change within a week, seriously, because these physician societies are highly dangerous. I'm not a member of any of them, but you can go to any doctor society in the country and you will see that it's absolutely dominated by the what we call the exhibitor hall in the middle, where big business and pharma has paid thousands, sometimes millions, to be there over the years. So of course these physician society is going to be completely loyal to them, not to the doctor paying them a few $100s a year. They become big business entities. And even away from physician societies, you take the associations like the American Heart Association or the American Diabetes Association, highly dangerous organizations. The AHA has a terrible history. It was basically founded on corruption. I'm sure a lot of your readers know that story. It was founded by Procter and Gamble. But the American Diabetes Association, there was a great article I read today in The Guardian. Finally, The Guardian produced a good article, but it was talking about if Kamala Harris wins the election, how she should appoint a national task force to combat diabetes, but focus on doing it through lifestyle, which I was surprised at. But they basically slammed the American Diabetes Association, which is an absolutely awful, deceitful, and corrupt organization. I encourage any of your viewers, if you want to, for a joke, go to the American Diabetes Association and register for their newsletter, because every day you will get at least 3 emails practically begging for money. They make hundreds of millions. Unfortunately, lots of people fall for it. And this organization for the last 20 years has basically been a spokesperson for big pharma and big food. And no surprise, under their watch, diabetes has exploded and they make more and more money. They will not say the simple words that you can fix your diabetes with low carb, even going ketogenic, which has been shown in studies to reverse diabetes very quickly. Now, I personally am not a believer in extreme diets. Ketogenic is very difficult for most people to maintain, but you can at least really go low carb and understand that that will reverse your type 2 diabetes very quickly. So that's my long answer to your question. How do you fix it? We can, but we have to have the willpower to do so, Dave.
How can people reach out to you? Do you have website? And obviously you've got your channel. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone is welcome to find me in my work. YouTube is where I put out a lot of my videos. I also have my own website, which is my name.com. So suneeldhand.com. I'm doing a lot of work now with natural holistic fat loss and reversing insulin resistance. And I'm not focused only on giving people information. I'm focusing scientifically on habit change, which is what this is all about, trying to rewire your brain. Because as most of your listeners know, if you change your habits, you change your life. We are simply a collection of habits. So I really focus on that for trying to get healthy.
No worries. So I'll link to your website and also your YouTube in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience with us, Dr. Dhand. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Dave. Good to join you.